Well, we're here with Father Bob Knippenberg and Father Pat Knippenberg, who are brothers and priests, yet they were raised in a non-Catholic home. This is an amazing story. I've personally been wanting to talk about it ever since I found out that I saw two Knippenbergs on the roster of priests for the diocese. So thank you both so much for making time. And we're just going to try to just tell this story. How did this happen? Maybe we can start with your childhood, Father Bob and Father Pat. What was your home life like growing up? What was your guys' faith life like in the home?
Well, I have no idea how it happened, but I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we met. My father worked for a company that transferred him several times. So right about the sixth grade, we finally settled in Lubbock, and that's where I did the rest of my growing up. I graduated high school, went to a couple of years at Tech. And then we'll go on from there. But in all that time, my memories certainly are all remembering Sunday church attendance, mass attendance on a very regular basis, especially once we got to Omaha, Nebraska. We ended up at an Episcopalian church. We were baptized and raised Episcopalians. At an Episcopalian church that was what is often referred to as high church, meaning that it was very liturgical. And in fact, the liturgy at the time was hardly discernibly different from the Catholic liturgy at that time, which was kind of prior to Vatican II. The only big difference that I can kind of remember this many years later is that the Mass was all in English. It was not in Latin. And I don't think there was any insert for naming the Pope in the Episcopalian Church. But everything else, we used incense, we had bells. As altar boys, we wore cassocks and surplices, and it was hardly discernible. There was a little shrine to the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Blessed Sacrament was reserved in the middle of the church in the tabernacle, in the middle of the altar. It was hardly discernibly different. And my family seemed to kind of tend towards that higher church in the Episcopalian Church, so that my experience was always very liturgical. But to tell you honestly, I think it was that experience in Omaha, Nebraska. I remember I was about 8 years of age at the time that I remember, probably beginning to think that I would be interested in pursuing the priesthood. Now, of course, my image or vision at the time was the Episcopalian priesthood. But I just kind of remember looking at the priests, participating in the liturgy, serving the Mass. We even called it the Mass, but anyways, it was, I just remember being very enamored as a youngster of the mystery of the whole thing. The music, the bells, the smells, all of that was just intriguing, I guess, as a child. And I think, even though it was in the Episcopalian Church, I think that's where the seed of my vocation was probably planted. And then for me, it took me until I was about 22 years of age to then seek full communion with the Catholic Church. And for me, that was based primarily on a growing awareness of church history. And I'll just be frank with you, I could never come to terms or never understand how somebody began a church based upon a divorce.
Yeah, it really is. It really is amazing to think about that it's all about the marriage issue in St. Thomas More that led to.
Yeah, exactly. And you realize that Henry VIII was even granted by the Pope the title of Defender of the Faith for his book on the Seven Sacraments.
Wow.
And yet, though, because of politics and all that kind of stuff, eventually everything that happened. And I just don't understand why you wouldn't go back further to the beginnings. And that's what kind of led me, I think, into the Catholic Church, is I just couldn't understand why you would want to start halfway through history when you could go all the way to the origins and go from there. And then as I grew up more and more, I became much more aware of the fact that actually a good part of the Knippenberg family on my grandfather's side were actually Catholic. They practiced the faith, they lived the faith, and so on and so forth. But my grandfather, I guess in marrying grandma, sort of drifted towards the Episcopalian Church. And that's why we were baptized and raised. My dad and his siblings, and then we were raised Episcopalian for that. So that's really, I guess, my memories. I certainly remember, I think Patrick might even remember a little bit too, that, in the home, we did things like we had an Advent wreath. And before every meal during Advent, we would say the Advent prayers and we would light the candle. And, I can't say that we did a whole lot of other things, but a few of those kinds of things we did in the home, actually. So I would say that at least in our earlier years, our home life was fairly connected to our faith life. I don't hardly ever remember missing a mass or church on the weekends, on Sunday. We didn't go to church on Saturdays. We went on Sundays. So in fact, I don't think they had vigil masses at that time. But anyways, so that's kind of my experience, I think, in those early years as far as growing up in a family. I would say, the faith, the religion, I don't think we were extremists in any way, but it certainly was an important part of our kind of early years, at least for me.
No, mine is all basically Bob. He was the leader of the kind of faith in a family, as far as with us siblings. And so I tell people I have a memory of Bob doing mass. And he was always the priest, of course. Nobody else would be the priest.
Actually, I think I
dressed my sister up as
a nun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I was a priest, though. I think I always had a mitre and a.
Yeah, he was higher than that.
I was usually a bishop.
But most of that I remember really was at our Episcopal Church in Lubbock. As a family, I know my own personal belief really came into effect when Bob was the leader of the acolytes, training of all the acolytes for the church. And I always felt like I can relate to the servers today, the acolytes that serve at Mass, how scared they were to be up in front of people, but to be at the altar, you were separate from everybody else, and it was kind of a duty that was special to do. And I remember we were candle bearers in the church, and before the consecration, after the Holy Holy, we bring the candles up as candle bearers on each side of the altar as the priest would consecrate the Eucharist. And I remember my brother saying, and being very serious about this, and he said, at this moment, Jesus Christ is there in the priest at the altar, and this is Christ. And as a kid, the imagination just flowed, and I was thinking, wow, he's really here, and I get to be a part of it. I get to serve. Wow, this is great. So it was that image always lasted with me, even when I fell away in my teenager years and stuff. But it was always an important memory that just kind of burned into the memory bank. So
your older brother was catechizing you even then, because if anybody knows Father Bob, he's a teacher. He's a scholar and a teacher.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. So that was really my memory of really understanding or having the faith inside me.
I think it was liturgy. In many ways, that's what, I don't remember a whole lot of doctrinal studies, even though we attended, Sunday school or, catechism classes or whatever in the Episcopal Church. But it was really the liturgy, I think, that captured my attention, and obviously what Father Pat's talking about, it kind of captured his imagination as a child. And I think that's why even to this very day, for me, the celebration of the liturgy is it needs to be done very specially.
But I'll tell you, it's really neat that you guys were altar servers together, because I was not an altar server growing up, but I was recently around a team of altar servers preparing for Mass, and it is like a fraternity. You know, it is really a special place, and I'm just so excited for my boys. Maybe they'll be like you two, that maybe there'll be vocations among some of our three boys, but the thought of them serving Mass together and what that will mean for their faith. So so special that you got to do that together. Did you often serve Masses together? Were you, the Knippenberg family was always on call for Masses?
I think by and large, because we have another brother, Todd, who's between me and Father Pat. He also was an altar server at times anyways. So I guess there probably were times when all three of us were serving. I can't say I remember that particularly, but it must have been,
pretty much, yeah.
We had the Episcopal Church in Lubbock was a rather small congregation, so we probably were on call quite a bit.
I'm sure some families watching know that feeling. They're on call for you got a quick team on hand. You guys probably have some in your phones as well for emergency Masses. So Father Bob, I know you growing up, you had mentioned to me before, you were always kind of around the faith. It was always important to you. Father Pat, what about you? Was the faith always a big deal to you? You said you might have drifted a little bit in high school. What was your faith life like as you journeyed through your, younger years?
Well, it had to do with our family moving quite a bit. With it was an only St. Paul. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. My two youngest sisters were in Omaha, Nebraska, and Lubbock, Texas, were born. And our family, when we moved to New Orleans, Louisiana, it was during my junior high years, and just the first part of high school. And our family there in New Orleans, just like all the churches, I think, in a lot of ways, were going through the early 70s, and the liturgy was changing, and we had girl altar servers that we'd never seen before in church, and they were barefoot, and we weren't used to that. Like Father Bob was saying, we're used to a higher liturgy. And my folks, I just remember them saying, we're not going to this church again, but we ended up not going to church in New Orleans. So it was something that I really kind of golfing became my religion in some ways.
Hey, I got a golf shirt on, so
Yeah, I'm a baller.
That's right.
So yeah, it's it was something that just kind of faded away, and I didn't really think about much.
Yeah, no, it's easy for that to happen. So it was actually a bad liturgical experience that drove you away, whereas the high liturgical experiences was pulling you, Father Bob, deeper into your faith.
Yeah.
So Father Bob, you mentioned in your 20s is when you started investigating the Catholic Church. Why did you do that? I mean, you were in a used to a high liturgy in the Episcopalian Church. You probably were, really connecting with God through all of that, but something still wasn't connecting. What was it that made you really look into Catholicism?
I think, to be honest with you, in some ways it was my failure in a chemistry class at the University of New Orleans that started me on the path of investigating other professions, if you will, because I thought I was headed towards medicine, and then I failed a chemistry class, and I thought, oh Lord, I'll never get into medical school with a failure in chemistry. So I started searching a little bit, and one day I was sitting in the Student Union building at the University of New Orleans, and I was flipping through the campus newspaper, and I just happened to come across a page that on one side had an ad for the Paulist Fathers, and on the other side had an ad for the Salesians of St. John Bosco.
And this was just in a normal school newspaper? Beautiful.
Yeah, very secular university, no religious connection. but there were two ads.
Advertising is important. See.
Yeah. And I clipped out, just on a whim, I guess, I clipped out both of those ads. I sent them off. I got the Paulist information back first. Wasn't terribly interested in publishing and blah, blah, blah. But I became enamored of the Salesians of St. John Bosco, the whole story about St. John Bosco. The more I read, the more I became familiar with all of that. I just sort of, I wanted to be a part of that, I guess. And that's when I formally sought full communion, so that almost simultaneously, I was talking to the Salesian Vocation director, and I was receiving instructions to be received into full communion. And probably about a month after I received the full communion, I went off to New Jersey to the Salesian House of Formation, and there started my postulancy, eventually my novitiate, and eventually professed temporary vows, and ended up with a degree in philosophy, scholastic philosophy, with the Salesians of St. John Bosco. So, and that's really probably where the depth of my Catholic experience and Catholic knowledge really blossomed, if you will, as I studied theology, philosophy, all those kinds of things. It was due to the Salesians of St. John Bosco.
Wow. So it wasn't really an intellectual journey that brought you to Catholicism. It was this sense of a longing for a deeper mission. And that's one thing that, the Protestant denominations just can't really offer at the same level. When you think about these religious orders and the mission field they enter into and the missions they have, it really is something beautiful that only the Catholic Church offers something that deep. So it was wanting to belong to something greater for God.
Yeah, I wanted my life to have some kind of purpose or meaning, and that just seemed to be the light of the dawn that said, here it is.
Wow.
And so that's basically what got me going into the faith and formal ministry.
So, Father Pat, what were you thinking as your brother was going through all of this? How did you catch wind of it, that he was converting and thinking about becoming a priest? What was going through your mind?
Well, originally, like in New Orleans, when we heard that he was going to be a Salesian, it was like, what? What does that mean? Or, and then Mom was telling us, your brother's becoming Catholic, and we were like, what? But after that, there wasn't really, as I said, there wasn't much of a connection in a lot of ways. It was him going off doing his thing. And like I said, I was into all sorts of sports in junior high, and I was kind of following my dad's lead. My dad's was super in football. He was all-city linebacker and center in Minnesota, and so it was a lot of, I wanted to follow his lead in being great in sports, but I found out I wasn't going to be Heisman Trophy material anytime soon. So, but really, in a lot of ways, it wasn't until after high school that, and even in the early years of just working out in the world, that when Bob went back to school, to seminary, that started kind of piquing my interest, because so many things had gone on in my life that had changed. So that was more important then at that point. But the original point in New Orleans wasn't as earth-shaking for me.
So, Father Bob, you were in formation with the Salesians, but then you actually didn't become a Salesian priest. You had become Catholic. Right, but then you spent a little bit of time back in the workforce. So maybe you could tell us about that part of your journey, finally becoming ordained. What was that journey like?
That was Father Dan Morales's fault, actually.
He's been in almost every video with a priest. They've mentioned Father Dan Morales.
Yeah, he's the one that, actually, I had gone to St. Mary's the first year that Father Dan was in theological studies. He and I were in the same first theology class, And at that time, I think, if I remember correctly, Bishop Cahill was in second or third theology, a little bit ahead of us. But anyways, that's where I met Dan Morales, actually. Now, I was only there for about a year. I was studying for Dallas, but ended up leaving and returning to the work world for, I don't know, what, 8-10 years or something. But anyways, once Dan was assigned to Port Lavaca, he had a building that he wanted to open a Catholic school in, and he remembered my Salesian background in Catholic education. Mm-hmm. And so that's when he started hounding me about coming down to help him open the Catholic school. And I did decide to come down. I told him I would give him a year of my life to help him get things off the ground and get things started. He was smart enough, or I was dumb enough to accept his invitation to live in the rectory at that time. And then I was kind of the administrator at the school. Frankly, I don't recall ever working harder in my life than the 3 or 4 months that we had to get the building ready, get teachers hired, buy textbooks, etc., to get the school open by the fall, which we were able to do on August 14th, the feast of St. Maximilian Kolbe. We had the first mass for the opening of the school. But that's, like I said, I had never worked harder in my life, and even it continued, because in order to become, in name, the principal of the school, I had to have a master's degree. So Dan got me going back to St. Mary's to work on a master's degree in pastoral studies. So I was running back and forth from Houston 2 days a week to take courses. I was working at the school. He had me teaching CCD on Wednesday nights. Wow. I never worked so hard in all my life, and it began to dawn on me that I'd never been happier.
Oh, wow.
And one day towards, I don't know, halfway through that school year, maybe 3/4 of the way through that school year, Dan and I had some, we just took a day off, and I think we went to Corpus and saw a movie or went out to eat or something. And on the way back, I said, Dan, I think I maybe am being called to priesthood. And he slammed on the brakes in his truck and pulled off the road and said, okay, let's talk. And before I knew it, I was talking to Father Gary Yanak, who was the vocation director at the time. Then they had me in Bishop Fellhauer's office, and Bishop said, I accept you as a seminarian. And then the next September, I was at the Josephinum in Ohio, and 3 years later was ordained a priest for the diocese. So that's kind of how that all happened. But it's really all Dan Morales' fault.
He's responsible for a lot of things around this diocese, it seems.
Yeah. So that's sort of how that all played out.
Now, that's a beautiful story. So, Father Pat, first your brother becomes Catholic. Okay, kind of weird, not sure what to make of it. Then he becomes a priest. So, could you walk us through what was going through your mind as your brother became ordained and how that impacted your journey into the church and then eventually to become a priest?
Well, during this time when he was with Father Dan down in Port Lavaca and with the school, they would come up every once in a while and visit the family there in Arlington, Texas, where we were at. And Father Dan had the way of just making himself part of the family. He just was natural. He's a natural person, so to speak. And just talking to me, he was like, well, what are you doing in your life? And it was like, well, I'm doing okay. I'm selling inkjet equipment and I'm doing fine, but along with him and Bob, they were, well, what's your vocation in life? Well, I don't know. You get married, you make money and have a family and all sorts of stuff. And at that time, shortly after that time, I was engaged to a girl for 2 years that I thought I was going to get married to, and that kind of fell apart. And that's when Bob was back in seminary. And that's my parents were disgruntled with the Episcopalian faith, and they were going to a church there in Arlington that was Episcopalian church, but the priest decided and his wife, they wanted to become Catholic, and the whole church
Wow.
became Catholic underneath John
You
Paul.
guys were just surrounded. Both of you were just surrounded by Catholicism. There was no escaping it.
That's exactly what happened with me, and that's it's a funny story in the sense that I was working at the water department in Arlington, Texas, and what happened, there was a group of people that were Jehovah's Witnesses, and at break time we'd start discussing. They can recruit pretty well.
Mhm.
And they were talking to me, and I was like, hey, these seem like really nice people. Maybe I should become a Jehovah's Witness. I have no really idea behind it, just because the people were nice and they were inviting.
Yeah.
And, I think Bob was back from seminary, but I don't know if it was the summer or Easter break or whatever, but I kind of told him, and he got upset. He's like, wait a minute, if you're going to make a decision, make an informed decision about what you believe, And so, as I started here again, my parents had given me a book on the Episcopalian faith, and everything led up. Everything was Catholic until Henry VIII.
Yeah.
And then the same thing kind of struck me. I said, well, wait a minute, there's a whole church 1,500 years before him. What is that all about? And so I started reading and getting books from Bob, learning about the saints, and
still catechizing you. That older brother wouldn't let you go.
Well, it was kind of and the Jehovah's Witness. One thing they stirred up in me was, what do I believe?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, okay, do I really believe this? And I've heard Bishop Robert Barron talk about, there's two things about Jesus. Either he was a total lunatic and crazy man, or he is what he said he is. And that's where I kind of came to the conclusion. And this goes back to the liturgy in Lubbock, that he was really there.
Yeah.
And I had neglected him over all these years, but it was kind of like one of those things where, okay, maybe he's calling me back. And that's when I really started thinking about as my parents had come into the church, then it wasn't like a year later that I was going to the masses and with them, and just having that sense there's something more. It's almost like, come and see.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of ringing in my heart, because I was 37, 38 years old at the time, and it was like, since that time that I was engaged ended, I thought, really, what am I doing with my life, and where is it going? And so, that's kind of led me at least into the church then.
Yeah, and so Father Bob, you mentioned a pretty cool story about when your brother and your parents came into the church. You surprised them, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, actually, that again, it was Father Dan called me when I was in the seminary up in Ohio. Had mentioned that Mom and Dad were coming into full communion, and I had the memory or the recollection that Father Pat came in at the same time, but I guess that wasn't exactly accurate. You came in a little later.
A little later. Yeah.
But on the day that Mom and Dad, the Sunday that they were received into full communion, the seminary let me fly home, actually. And so Father Dan and I were in the assembly and surprised Mom and Dad when they were received into full communion. At this church that was, at the time, it was just one of the three Anglican youth churches. It was before the Ordinariate, I think, was set up, but there was Walsingham in Houston, St. Mary the Virgin in Arlington, and then Atonement in San Antonio were the three Anglican youth parishes they were Catholic, but they used the Anglican liturgy in Texas.
Wow. No, I think it's just such a beautiful story too for folks that maybe are worried about their family members. I mean, what God did, I know it was bigger than just you, Father Bob, but you were the first to come into Rome, and then your brother and parents followed. I know you've had other family members followed as well. So a great testimony to all of us that each of us matter in God's plan. There are bigger things going on too. So Father Pat, what took you then from convert to priest? What was that part of your journey like?
Yeah, it was that's probably the most interesting part for me, is because there was not too long after I was in the church. I was in about 2 years. I came in when I was 36 years old, because I know I was 38 years old when there was an advertisement for an Emmaus walk. See if vocation, if this could be your vocation. And my brother was always telling me, if just kind of planting seeds, go to seminary. They'll let you know if you have a vocation or not. But if you're questioning whether you're called, that's the place to go. That's where they find out. And so it was when I was 38 that this advertisement came for men from 18 years of age.
Another advertisement. Man,
yeah.
You both it was ads for both of you.
Yeah, and I went for our church and I saw that and I said, well, I'm 38. The cutoff is 39. Well, maybe I ought to go ahead and see. I don't have to make a commitment. I'll go on the weekend and see. And yeah, that was one of the things that I actually had a Monsignor there in Dallas said, son, why do you even want to think about a vocation at this late in life? It's just stay in the business world, and well, I don't know. I feel called for some reason. I can't really explain it, but that's just the seeds of that were planted. And
yeah. No, the priest that presided at the wedding for my wife and I, he became a priest in his 50s. I would love to. For you would enjoy meeting him, but he had quite the journey. He went from basically being a surfer dude, bodyguard in his early days. Then he started, studying philosophy, then religion, got a master's of divinity from Harvard, then a PhD from Catholic University. So the seminary accepted him as a later vocation, but God is using him and he's teaching at the seminary now. So God has a plan for each of us. No matter what stage of the game we're in, there's always more to the story. So I think the last question I'd love to ask, I'm sure everyone asks, is what's it like to be brothers and priests? And what was it like calling each other father the first time?
I don't know. It's, I guess because, the recognition or whatever of, brother priests, I kind of, take a little bit of, joy in that. People will say, your brother's a priest too, and I'm like, yeah, it's, so it's unique and it's interesting, I guess. But I don't know. I don't think we probably, are different with each other. I've probably gotten to know Patrick a little bit more only because during his junior high school, early college years, I was pretty much away from the family.
Right.
And probably wasn't a big part of their lives at that time in their lives, so, so we've kind of gotten, that done, I guess, a little bit more. But I mean, heck, we go weeks without talking to each other. So, because sometimes we're busy,
Yeah.
and so
sounds like those brothers.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of it, and we're only, an hour apart. But that's, that's kind of the way it is, I guess.
There's kind of a running joke. Bob has always said he was the smartest and best looking in the family, and so whenever I fill in, or he's been at the parishes he's been at, and I go and fill in, I'll say, my brother might be the smartest, but I think I'm the better looking. And the congregation usually gets a big kick out of that, and they're like, okay, you guys are brothers, it's okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've already pulled that here in hosting. I tell people, I'm the oldest of 5 children, but I'm not only the oldest, I'm the smartest and the best looking.
Totally unbiased too. Yeah.
Totally unbiased. Yes.
Well, I know who has the better golf game though. right?
Oh, yeah, no debate about that. None whatsoever.
Well, on behalf of many of us, thank you both so much for your vocations and for serving the people of the Diocese of Victoria and all that you do for us. So thank you both for saying yes. Father Bob, thank you for catechizing your brother even when you were little boys at the altar. And Father Pat, thank you for not being afraid to answer the Lord's call, even a little later than most in life, but he's certainly done a lot through you and will continue to do a lot through both of you. So thank you both so much. Maybe we could close with some kind of a brotherly blessing or prayer. Would you both mind closing us in prayer somehow?
Sure, absolutely. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down upon you and remain with you now and forever. Amen.
Amen.